I mean, they say, you know, make them wait, make the readers wait. And I would wait for her my entire life. Hi everyone, welcome to Sound and Fury Book Reviews. As usual, I am Tina. I read 4 books in January, as on top of reading The Guermante's Way by Proust. I've also changed how I rate books. I used to give stars based on kind of like an overall like feeling or like impression that I had, but I've done some research into how other people actually rate books, and I've invented a ranking system that generates stars based on points. This seems more like legit to me, and so I'm going to try it for 2021. It also helps me get rid of the dreaded 0.5 star issue when ranking things on Amazon and Goodreads. And because I always seem to have to talk about my own book, What Branches Grow, I spent the last month going through and fixing some rather embarrassing typos and making some minor changes based on another author's suggestions. As such, I've reposted the book on Amazon, and I added my award badge to it, which is kind of cool. Anyway, what did I read in January that was better than my book probably? So the first book that I read in 2021 was After the Flood by Kassandra Montag. I got this book from the library. Go library. I can't remember where I heard of it. Probably I was looking comparable post-apocalyptic titles, and I was like, oh yeah, this sounds cool. I'll read this too. So this book is very well written, poignant, emotionally fraught, exciting, and it approaches an overdone theme in a refreshing way that I very much appreciated. So related to the latter point, this is a book that I still would have enjoyed before I had kids, even though I didn't really like books about children back then, and I still don't really, but definitely resonates more strongly with me now that I have 2 daughters. That's not to say that you have to have kids to understand Myra, the main character's kind of motivations, but it does help the story have an emotional relevance if you do have kids in your life in some respect, even if, you know, they're nieces or nephews or, you know, good friends, kids, things like that. And what I mean by an overdone theme is, I'm talking about there's a lot of stories about women and motherhood, a lot of them. Despite being a mother myself, I find the theme often eye-rollingly hyperbolic, full of characters that have literally no life aside from their children. I'm thinking of one I read back in 2018, I think called Wild Kingdom. In that one, the mother is one of those all-encompassing mothers who gets no characterization other than the love of her child. We aren't just our children. We have striven for decades, centuries to be shown to be anything other than just repositories for children. So please, can we have some books with mothers that are badass? Myra is not like this. She is a mother, yes, but she has other facets of her personality, other interests. She's a sexual person. She's fierce. She's protective. She's a natural leader. She's quick thinking, determined, and resourceful. In truth, she reminds me actually of Delia from my own book. That might be why I liked her so much. True, Myra lies a bit. And she's a bit cold, but I found her extremely compelling and realistic. Maybe because she does all the stuff that I would do in that situation, and I'm kind of cold. I'm a bit of a robot. Anyway, she plays to her strengths. She doesn't use guns because she's stronger with knives. You know, when she goes on the offensive, she takes out the more physically intimidating opponents first, which makes sense. She also has a tragic backstory that does explain her choices. I read a few Goodreads reviews saying that she treats her daughter Pearl terribly, and I completely disagree with that. She's under a lot of pressure. She makes mistakes regarding Pearl, yes, but she's never abusive. She's never overly harsh with her. I mean, I've made tons of mistakes with my toddler. I can't imagine having to mother, you know, her in Myra's situation. Like, doing it during COVID was hard enough. The setting was great. At first I was like, Waterworld, really? Waterworld? But then it grew on me and I really liked it. I loved how there wasn't like an exposition dump at the start, but we learned how we went as the world, you know, we learned as we went through the book how the world started kind of going down the tubes. Myra's experiences regarding the gradual decline of society were informative without belaboring it. I could have used a bit more blame placed on human action, but really, like, how else? We all know climate change, well, not all of us know that climate change is real. I also like the pacing. Myra is driven further north in search of her other daughter. That's the plot. But it's not one of those, we need to get there in 2 days situations. It takes her weeks to even get going, but she never stops working. I think it allowed for a more gradual building of relationships, like between Myra and this other woman named Marianne, things like that. The latter, her backstory is heartbreaking. I actually teared up. I think it makes sense that we don't learn a lot about the other characters because Myra distances herself from them, but I do think we could have gotten a bit more. I forgot that Thomas, one of the characters, isn't even in the book until the very end, so that probably shouldn't have happened. But there were so many awesome moments in this book. There's a part about snakes that was fantastic. Anything to do with the ship in peril was absolutely enthralling. I do have a affinity for books about boats though, so that might be a bias on my part. There was a reasonable amount of diversity. Pearl is half Latinx, and there were other characters who were people of color. Physical appearance wasn't described very often, so other characters could have been non-white too, but I just didn't know. This was a fantastic book to start off the year. I highly recommend it for anyone who enjoys post-apocalyptic literature. I recommend it for people that are, you know, mothers, parents, fans of Waterworld, women-led stories, and people who like boats. There's lots of boats in this. One thing I thought was dumb was that Pearl and Rose names were both water-related. Like, give me a break. That was silly. So yeah, 5 out of 5 stars. There's a couple quotes that I liked. One time, Myra, to explain her personality, she says, "You overestimate how much you factor into my decisions," which I thought was quite funny. And then there's a beautiful part. "The hull hit the water and a crack split the air, so loud that it cut through the roar of the wind and the thunder of the waves." And not only is that kind of a beautiful sentence, but it reminds me of like when I drive a boat, just smashing through. My husband calls it hull cracking. I think I've talked about this before. I love boats. I love the water. Hence why I named my daughter Marina. Yeah, so I'll stop now. The next book that I read was one that I was very much waiting for, which was part 2 to Gideon the Ninth, which is Harrow the Ninth. I got it from Amazon because I had Christmas gift cards, and I know I'm not an adult apparently. I can't just buy books if I want to. I have to use gift cards. But anyway, it is a fascinating and exhilarating sequel that resolves a lot of questions from the first one, Gideon the Ninth, and it builds momentum for the next one in the series. I wish there was a million more, but apparently there's one more coming. There's lots of fight scenes, sexual tension, hilarious dialogue, and it's got a very unique world building that I very much enjoyed. I was so excited for this novel. I was blown away by its predecessor, as you probably know. That being said, this is a direct continuation of the previous story, so I don't want to get into too much about that because it would spoil Gideon the Ninth. So I'm going to give a brief overview of the novel and why I rated it so highly, and then I'm going to go into a bit of a fangirl about it, which will have spoilers, and I'll tell you when that's coming so you can skip it. Also, you can skip it if you didn't like the book or if you think I'm annoying. That's fine. I love the characters in this novel. They all learn and grow, especially the titular character, Harrow. I give the plot itself, though, a 4 out of 5 because, like the first novel, it takes a little bit to get situated, and at times I was struggling to remember who people were for a while. I love the overall idea and concepts, but I was more confused than I wanted to be at times. Also, there was a huge info dump at the end that didn't leave me entirely satisfied, and it was a lot to take in. I actually ended up reading it twice because I was like, wait, what? The prose and setting are perfect. I love, love, love the idea of necromancers in space. It's a concept that doesn't seem like it would work. I mean, what is there in space except a lot of nothing? But Harrow and the others' powers are expanded upon this novel as being able to manipulate more than just bone, and that explains why they are so powerful, so it's pretty cool. I love the prose, as I said. The bits of humor and the casual yet kind of verbose narration are a lot of fun. I gave the book a 4 though on like readability because it takes almost half the book to get used to the second person. Like most perfectly crafted second persons, you know, it has a purpose that makes sense in the end. It reminded me of the relation between N.K. Jemisin's The Broken Earth trilogy. I only have one book of these. I don't know why. I mean, I got them from the library, so that's why. I need to buy the other 2. Anyway. It reminded me of that. But it does make for a shaky start. Second person is hard. The novel gets a 5 for diversity for me because it just revels in its queerness and gives us a world where sexism doesn't seem to exist, and we get a bonus point for the cover, which is straight up badass. Overall, I had such fun reading this novel, and I can't wait for the 3rd in the series. 5 out of 5 stars. I'm going to give you some quotes that I liked, and then I'm going to get into my kind of spoiler review, which is even more of me talking about this book. So first one, poetry is one of the most beautiful shadows a civilization can cast across time. Which is true. If anything, it seemed to be gaining momentum, like a very boring avalanche. They were the eyes of a winter season without any promise of spring. And this would have been cool if it wasn't faintly ridiculous, which is basically just me in a nutshell, so I was like, I identify with this. Okay, now I'm going to jump to spoilers. I'll give you a timestamp here to jump to if you don't want to listen to this. There were so many revelations in this novel. Gideon's parentage and her name, you know, Harrow's prudishness, what was up with God, like all of these things we learn about. My favorite part was when we learned that Ortis, the State of Duty version, that his name was actually Gideon, but his name was supplanted in Harrow's mind due to the brain mending. I was like, oh, this author's so good. She just like, things, I don't know, she's so smart. I love her. I adored the inclusion of Abigail and Magnus again because they're just like such a great couple, and I love that we got a bit more of their banter and things like that. And I love how like there were like inside jokes that the reader becomes privy to that are repeated. The book just kind of envelops you in this kind of world, and you feel like you're part of their weird group of crazy necromancers. I also knew from the start that Ortis's poem would come back in some important way, but I did not anticipate that it would be like this bomb-ass fight between Nonius and the Sleeper. That was awesome. And it's kind of funny because God says earlier, the quote that I said about poetry is one of the most beautiful shadows the civilization can cast across time. I'm not sure if that was supposed to be a subtle foreshadowing, but it is ironic that how poetry kind of saved Harrow's ass in that she doesn't like poetry at all. It was pretty funny. I liked the relationship between Ianth, whatever, and Harrow because it's so complex, but it's also very simple. It's clearly a younger, shy, unsure girl crushing on an older girl who is too self-absorbed to make a move herself. She does, though, of course, and then she's rejected, but who knows if she wouldn't have been if Harrow wasn't, like, hunting Ortis at that moment. It's also a rivalry, though, which is interesting. Their exchanges made me laugh quite often. Something, I think Anna says, sometimes I think you look like a Twig's funeral, which is very funny. If they had continued on without the whole kind of end of the novel, I bet they would have hooked up eventually. God, Mercy, and Augustine were wonderful additions, as each was compelling in their own way. John's blandness and geniality made his moments of, pure power all the more frightening. It makes sense they probably wouldn't give Ianth and Harrow that much attention being 10,000 years old. I mean, I barely pay attention to slightly beyond teenagers, and I'm only like 200 years old. So, but the part where they make out just killed me. I laughed so hard at Harrow's horrified reaction. Like, I was sitting there for like 5 minutes laughing. I think I reread it like 3 times. It was so enjoyable. And then you have Ianth's comment later when she's like, that was disgusting to say the least. Old people should be shot. And I just died again. And then we have, what I was waiting for the entire damn book, The Return of Gideon. When she arrived again, I just burst into a smile and I was like, yes, out loud. I loved her in the first book, and to have her snarky ass comments back was like such a joy. I mean, they say, make them wait, make the readers wait, and I would wait for her my entire life. Anyway, her comments like she wants the D and the D stands for dead, that kind of shit just kills me. I love it. That kind of humor, the absurdity of it, yeah, I can't take it. In Gideon the Ninth, I was only partially convinced that the story existed in our universe. I wasn't sure. This book makes it clear that it is our sun, our earth, and our people, but 10,000 years in the future. I loved how they used magic to travel through space quicker. It doesn't require a deeper scientific explanation, and it works with the world's mechanics, which I enjoyed. It felt a little like Event Horizon, which was kind of neat, because I don't know, I'm always talking about Event Horizon. I loved how we're finally explaining the whole Cavalier Necromancer thing. In the first book, I just was under the impression that the Cavalier was just like a bodyguard. I think we're supposed to believe that. But then when the revelation came about, I spent a good 10 minutes kind of trying to explain it to my husband. He was not interested. I think he didn't listen to me at all. It makes so much sense now, though, why Aglamene wanted Gideon to learn the rapier. Weak old necromancers can't handle a broadsword, especially Harrow. She can barely, hold it on her back. I love that these little things, from the first book come into the second in such a good way. The second person, as I said before, grows on you. At first, I assumed it was Harrow's mental state being disassociated from her person. It took me perhaps far too long to realize that this was probably Gideon. And when I did, I was like, oh, good, she's coming back. I mean, I always assumed she would come back. I loved Harrow too. She was such a fragile, brittle little thing, just yearning for love, but refusing to admit it. And she's oh so strong. She's not just magically, but her determination makes her likable. The marrow in the soup was my favorite scene of all. I assumed she was just going to poison the Saint of Duty, but when she uses her own marrow, like bone marrow, to blast him apart from the inside, I was legitimately shocked. That was so cool. So that's the end of my spoilery kind of fangirly. Not really a rant, more like a rave. But I want to show you my daughter's interpretation of the skull from, I think she was trying to draw the skull there in the corner. She's just over 3. I think it's pretty good. Yeah, great annotation. Anyway, I adored this book. I adored it. 5 out of 5, stars in my eyes, stars. If you don't like it, I don't care. You can tell me in the comments, but I adore it. So, the next book I read was Alien Planet by Fletcher Pratt. It's an old school science fiction, classic sci-fi from 1932. I have a whole other video about it. Check out my old school science fiction playlist. I'm just going to say it was a commendable effort for its time 90 years ago. But today this novel is dry, slow, and unremarkable. Alien Planet is a found text story focusing on a man named Alvin who's explaining his journey with an alien to the alien's homeworld. I didn't dislike it, but it was very dull. It didn't have a lot of redeeming qualities. You can check out my review if you want to know more about it. I do a bit of a deep dive into kind of some other themes and the technology and stuff. I gave it 2 out of 5 stars. I recommend it to only the most, obsessive of old sci-fi readers. Or if you're from the 30s. The last book I read was The Weight of Things by Marianne Fritz. It's from 1978. It's a literary fiction. It's very tiny. I got it on Amazon, I think. It's part of this project called the Dorothy Project, which publishes these kind of lesser known literary fictions. Anyway, The Weight of Things is an unsettling short story about one woman's loneliness, futility, and compromised mental health, but she also represents society struggling to reclaim itself after a catastrophe. I can't really describe what this novel is about without giving away most of it, so I'll explain that the author is an often overlooked literary novelist, and she's been overlooked for reasons I'm going to get into, which is at the end. Her novel is about far more than it appears on the surface, and while it was a very quick read, it leaves a lot to contemplate. When I was writing my review and attempting to unpack it, I came to understand it a lot more than I did while reading. Because when you're reading it, you're trying to figure it out. It definitely is one of those books you have to reflect on afterward. Sometimes it's hard to review literary fiction because what is often an issue in a regular novel, like sort of plot, character development, things like that, are deliberately obtuse in a literary novel in order to express a certain theme or concept. I mean, if you like literary fiction, you know what I'm talking about. That being said, this novel, despite its eventual result, was not as shattering to me as some of the critics on the back claim it to be. Perhaps this is because I found the twist, if you can call it that, obvious from the start, but perhaps it's supposed to be obvious from the start. Maybe the point of the novel is that you see it all coming, that we know what's going to happen, but we, the reader, are hopeless to prevent it. We're forced to watch, hoping against hope that what we're reading is projections and metaphors rather than events. Turns out they're events. This helplessness in tandem with actions taken in the novel is where the horror derives from. It's not a horror novel, it's domestic fiction with this horrific element to it. We, society, basically, are aware of something that is wrong, but we don't or can't or won't do anything to stop it. And that's, I think, what this novel is trying to show. It's trying to show how people can see something wrong, but they won't act to prevent it. And we're forced to take that role as the reader. Berta, the main character, is a woman without support. I think that's the most important thing to get from this as well. A woman who has always felt like a burden, a woman likely never recovered from postpartum depression, a woman weighed down by everyday life, which is the weight of things. That's what she talks about. Berta represents the repressive state of women in the 50s, but also a nation limping away after World War II. Berta is both the female character and an allegory for Austria. No character in the book is without this duality. There's only 4 other characters. Her husband Wilhelm is both pathetic and industrious, complacent and struggling. His new wife Wilhelmine, is self-serving but also logical. And Rudolph, the missing father, he is like the senseless death of culture and nobility. Had the war not claimed him, possibly things might have been different. Who knows? The Weight of Things, in the end, is a brilliant book. It is intelligent, it's deeply distressing, it's a novel that deserves to be read and studied more widely. It deserves to be up there with the masters, as they say. I'm going to talk about Marianne Fritz for a minute. Here comes a bit of a rant. So, my version has an afterword discussing Fritz as a writer and her other projects, one of which is the sprawling 10,000 word untranslatable text that sounds absolutely amazing to me. I would learn to speak German just to read it. I mean, the thing is, though, we've all heard of James Joyce and David Foster Wallace and their crazy stuff, but no one's heard of Marianne Fritz. The afterword says this about her. And this is probably one of the truest and most interesting passages I've ever read. It says, the comparison with Joyce is both obvious and inopposite, and has been made by critics within and beyond the German-speaking world. Against the clear dissimilarities in tone, subject matter, and working methods stand the male genius as the archetype against which the female author is to be compared. If she passes muster, she may be crowned a female Joyce. If she falls short, her work is disqualified as an extravagance. A further injustice to a female writer of such staggering ambition is the lack of feminine analogue to the stereotype of the mad genius. Women's madness cannot invoke the dignity of a late Nietzsche or Thomas Chatterton, but is classed with the aberrations of hysterics and cat ladies. This is true. Think about any time you think of a mad genius. You think of Tesla. Yeah, you think of Nietzsche. You think of these men, but can you think of any female mad geniuses? No, because critics at the time, publishers at the time, society at the time of these women writing were like, oh, you're just crazy. You're not smart crazy, you're just crazy. And this is so frustrating because women, when they are crazy, as I said, they're always Medea. You know, they're always Bertha Mason from Jane Eyre. I mean, these are fictional, but I think it's fair to say that when genius men do bad things, we excuse them for it. For example, David Foster Wallace stalked and harassed his girlfriend for years, but we still read his book. I've read his book. But genius women aren't given this title of genius, let alone get away with being anything but perfect when they do have that title. It's getting better now, I think, but this is why we don't have a lot of postmodern or modernist work by female authors that, you know, we have a few. You know, we have Virginia Woolf. We got her, thankfully. But no one took female writers very seriously back then, and that was a real shame, and it really makes me annoyed. Anyway, I just thought I would mention that as it seems an important addenda to the book, especially if you're wondering who Marianne Fritz is and why you should read her stuff. I give the book 4 out of 5 stars, and I would recommend it to anyone who likes literary fiction. I would recommend it to people that are interested in World War II, in the aftermath of World War II. I'd recommend it to people that want to read something sad. There's a quote I like. "A scream always bored into Bertha like a beetle through wood, before finally, freed from the clutches of decay and death, it would echo off into the sky." So yeah. Those are my reviews for January. It was off to a great start. I read 3 fabulous books and 1 okay book. Thanks for watching. I'm not including videos of my dogs anymore because I've run out of stuff, and they're both old. They don't do anything anymore. They just like sit on the ground. So, so I've cut that out, and I'm sorry about that. But there's nothing I can do. I can't just prod them into moving and doing funny things. So anyway, thanks again.